Hello and welcome to lesson 1 of how to let that shit go. So this part 1 lesson is all about how to get you to tell your story to release your pain. So before we go into it, I want to precursor this with the famous Buddha quote that goes like, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Now, I will also sandwich that with the understanding that I think we all have the intent to forgive. I know that I was like, I get it, okay? Personal growth is great, and I know I just need to forgive. I just need to let it go. But I just can't do it. I don't understand how it's like integrated into my being, this anger, this resentment, this frustration, this shame, this guilt, whatever it is. It felt so integrated in my being that I did not know how to let it go. And it is hard because there's, like I'm going to share in this course, there's a lot of steps that go into that. It's not so simple as just be like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I let it go. It's not that simple. It is, however, a simple process as long as you go through all of the steps that I'm going to share in this. It's not that hard, but it does take time, okay? So diving into step 1 on how to let these things go is you have to tell your story. Telling your story is the single-handedly the most important aspect of letting go of your past pain and your past baggage. Everything else I share after this kind of all makes sense if you understand why it's so important to tell your story. So when we are holding on to baggage or anger or pain that we can't let go of, you have to accept the fact that you are somewhat playing the victim here. And that's okay. We all play the victim at some point in our lives. I've played the victim plenty of times in my life, but you're here because you don't want to be the victim anymore. You don't want to be addicted to your suffering. But we have to understand what story it is that we are addicted to. So when I say that you are addicted to your suffering, and if you've been here in Be The Hero Academy long enough, you understand this concept that you are addicted to your suffering. Between the ages of 0 and 14, you were instilled with a program, and that program is everything that happened to you and around you between those ages. And so it's not just limited to what your parents did. It's also your peers, your school system, your environment, the way that society was like in the place that you grew up in, whether you're maybe in a poor neighborhood, in a rich neighborhood, things like that. And everything that happens to you and how you perceive it happens to you creates your system of beliefs that are automatic and unconscious. And you basically, for the rest of your life, stay in the habit of what you were taught was true between 0 to 14. This is why people who, regardless of how talented they are, if they grew up in like a poor family or poor situation where their parents told them that money is hard to come by, that is an example of a belief that becomes automatic and unconscious, that is ingrained as a truth that shapes our reality, even though it doesn't logically make sense. You might be the most talented and capable person and still struggle to make money because you have that belief. But of course, you can change that belief. You're not stuck with that belief. And so we have this whole belief system that creates the story of how we go through our life. So one term for it is your belief system, your programming. The other way to describe it is the story that you tell yourself. And so the story that I could tell myself, especially when it comes to healing and baggage and pain, is something like I held on to the story that people cannot be trusted. I'll get into that a little bit later, but that is just an example of how one experience or one perception that you had as a child can stick with you and can cause your pain. And so this step 1 that you take, I want you to start from the standpoint of the present moment. In other workshops and other things, it's great to go back to childhood memories and use that as the starting point. But in this situation, I want you to just think about your present or your most recent situation that is causing you the most pain and suffering and anger. And the reason I want you to do that is because we're going to work from a top-down approach as opposed to a bottom-up approach. And so if there's something, recent, that the most recent thing that you've had happen to you that you can't let go of, I want you to start there. Now, how do you tell your story? The easiest way to think of telling your story is to think of it like writing your victim case. You're playing the victim here, and that's okay. And I want you now to go all in and tell the judge why you are not guilty. Tell me why it was not fair. Tell me why you were done wrong. Tell me everything that you want to complain about and share it. Now, the key thing is that you actually have to have it written on paper. When you tell your story, I need you to tell it to yourself so that you can reflect on it. So I know it's great, a lot of people who, you have a trusted, partner or even best friend who you feel like you can share your complaints with about life. That's not what this is about. That's more about venting. This is about getting clear on the root words that we are choosing when we explain our situation in life. Because the thing is, the next steps, in the steps that follow, we're going to start to question what those stories and words might have come from. So you need to tell your story, write your victim case, explain to the judge why this is not fair. This happened to me. This person was terrible. I'm doing all the good things. And don't think of it from a bad perspective. This is a part of the healing process. And you need to write it on paper. I don't care if you do it on paper or if you do it on a note or on your computer. It doesn't matter. It needs to be in writing so that you can see those words. Okay? So now, step 2, feel your pain. Many of us might have heard the saying that you have to feel it to heal it. It's kind of cheesy, but it's kind of true. So step 1 and step 2 may happen in a different order. If you are so far removed from your pain, you might struggle to start with step 1. You might not have the words to explain why you're so mad at someone, and you might not even acknowledge the fact that you are still so mad at someone. You might feel a sense of detachedness or dissociation, and if so, you might need to start on step 2 instead. And regardless, everyone has to go through step 2. There is a law of the universe, or I guess it's a law in Hermetic principle. Hermetic principle is kind of this, pre-Christianity philosophy based on a philosopher known as Hermes Trismegistus. You can check out my YouTube series if you're curious about what that philosophy is all about, but there is a fundamental principle in there, which is the idea that it's called the law of correspondence. And it's that everything in the world corresponds in equalization in a sense. And so you can almost imagine it like the pendulum swing. And the pendulum swings one way, and if the pendulum swings this far this way, it's going to swing back the other way the same amount. If the pendulum only swings a centimeter or an inch, it's only going to swing the other direction, a centimeter or an inch. And you have to remember that everything is vibration, everything all functions on the same principle. And so just like a pendulum, you yourself are functioning like that pendulum. You cannot expand outward into this most beaming, joyous, fulfilling life unless you are willing to go deeper into your darkness and your sense of self. You can only feel into your light in vibration, in equal correspondence, that you surrender into your darkness and pain. This is something that a lot of people do not want to have to do. We are very much in a society that, I think some people are very okay with wallowing in their emotions. But I think for the most part, we see negative emotions as bad. Those are something bad. I don't want them. And it's almost like we're just so pain averse, which we kind of know. We're a very pain averse society. And so when we experience painful emotions, we want to not have to experience them again, which is why so many people, especially the younger generation now, my generation of Gen Z, Gen Alpha, even millennials, we throw a lot of dopamine addictions on top of that because we're so avoidant of discomfort and pain. Well, here in this healing phase, you know that you're ready to do the work. And doing the work in this sense, it's not gonna be a simple action that you sit down and do, but you need to start to feel into that pain further. You need to feel into that darkness. You need to feel into the depths of that pain. You need to experience your own version of a dark night of the soul. Dark night of the soul is that spiritual idea of, Jesus going into the desert and going into this place of darkness to reflect on his own shadows and his own darkness before he could share his messages of light. Well, the same concept goes for all people who are going through a spiritual journey, an awakening journey. You have to sit in your darkness. You need to isolate yourself. And that might not be literal. You might not have the liberty of having an opportunity in your life where you can actually isolate from society. But you can find moments. You can absolutely create spaces in small doses in your life where you are dedicated essentially to doing nothing and essentially to meditating on what emotions come up when you think of those inklings of memories that you do imagine, because I know you have those memories in there. I know that you have a concept of what that pain is, what memories are causing the pain. And if you sit in that space of letting anything come up, you are going to start to feel into your pain. For an example, I don't have that much trauma, you guys. Like, I have unmet need traumas, not big T traumas. And granted, some people argue that it's all perceived the same in your brain and body. Everyone perceives it the same. But still, I think people with bigger trauma have bigger things to work through oftentimes. But point being, I have not had that much trauma in my life. And yet, when I had to go through my biggest dark night of the soul, and I've gone through probably 2 big dark nights of the soul at this point. And so my first dark night of the soul I experienced in 2020 through 2022. So about 2 years worth that I would consider my dark night of the soul phase. And this was a time in which I was wintering. We had rented a house in Montana after COVID because just for the safety and security, which is a separate story in and of itself. But we were there, and it was a very, very depressing period of my life because the place that we lived was, in the middle of nowhere. It was cold and gloomy and not snowy, and the town was empty, and there was no one. I had 0 friends and of any age, not even just my age. The town was kind of this meth-ridden town. It was on Native American reservation. There was nothing to do because it was on Native American reservation. You can't really hike on the land, so there was no public access to the outdoors and just all of this stuff. And it was a really difficult period of my life because I was also coming off of 7 years of really trying to cope with the feeling of being rejected by pretty much everyone all of my friends, peers, and even extended family. And I had to deal with that feeling of unworthiness and rejection. And so I was working on healing that, but now I was in this situation in my life where I was like, cool, I was rejected by everyone, and now I hate my life. And at the same time, simultaneously, it was like, your brain elaborates on the story, and it's seeing all of the reasons why your life sucks. And I was struggling with my business at the time. It wasn't growing. I was really at this plateau phase. It's not improving, but I was working all the time, and I was mad that I wasn't improving because I was working like 10 hours a day. And this whole story shows up. And I remember during that time, because I was already in this phase of isolation, I had the opportunity in my life to actually be isolated. But I was so in chaos and turmoil in my own head. And I was so tired of feeling like I don't want to get out of bed every day. I get out of bed and I would just feel sad all day or angry. And I got to this point where I was so sick and tired of the turmoil that I had no choice but to just accept it and surrender to it. And that is your key word here for this step 2 of feeling your pain. The key word is surrender. You need to just allow. You don't realize how much you're putting putting a wall up on the emotions that you're holding within your being, particularly held in the solar plexus and sacral chakra area. And you don't realize how strong that wall is until you start to consider the word allow and surrender. And if you focus your intent on allowing and surrendering to whatever comes up, the floodgates start to open. And that is an amazing thing. You need to have the floodgates open in order to heal. If you do not feel your pain, you will dissociate from it. And if you dissociate from it, you are dissociating from your entire emotional being. And you can expect a life feeling about the same that you feel now. You will not be able to expand into newer high vibrations of fulfillment and purpose and confidence and self-love. So this is the key part. I need you to feel your pain, and I need you to accept that just because it hurts doesn't mean it's bad. This is part of your healing journey, and for as far in as you go is as far outward as you will expand. Okay, moving on to step 3. Step 3 is all about, excuse my dinging. Step 3 is all about questioning your story, questioning yourself. Now, this sounds contradictory now. First, I'm telling you, tell your story, tell your victim story, tell me everything that went wrong, right? And it's true, it's valid. Your story, you have to give validity to the fact that that was your emotional experience. It was your story, but your emotions are not the truth. And this is all kind of contradicts what I just said in the last thing, which is that you need to feel your emotions. But you have to remember that you are an energetic being. And just because the energy of negativity flows through you doesn't mean it's bad, nor does it mean it's the truth. Doesn't mean that reality was that way, but it's completely true that it was that way to you. And the reason I share that is because now in this step is where you are going to basically break apart and tear apart the case that you submitted to the judge on why you didn't deserve it and why you were a victim. Don't worry, I'm not gonna we are gonna finish this course from a place of, it's not your fault, but we do have to go through this one step where you're taking responsibility for the fact that it's just your beliefs and just your programming that has influenced you so strongly to create that story, that what happened in your life was your programming and your beliefs that created it. I know that's hard for a lot of people to accept, that essentially you created the hard things in your life, but once you do, you have the ability to move past it and give yourself a little more empathy for the fact that your beliefs, just because you acted on your beliefs and they were yours and you did it, doesn't mean those beliefs were your fault per se. Getting back into it. So here's how you're gonna question yourself. I want you to just ask why, okay? So at this point in step 3, you should already have had an essay written on why you were wronged, okay? And I don't care if it's a 10-page essay, 20-page essay, but it does need to have some substance to it. If you write one paragraph, that's probably not gonna cut it on helping you identify where your pain is and deconstruct it from there. You gotta get really deep, and that's why you might need to feel your pain first. You might need to feel your pain and go back to writing your story. It might take a week of doing the process. It might take a month. It might take a couple months. And you might need to cycle back to it as more things come up. Point being though, is that you're gonna look at that long story, that essay that you've written, and you are going to look at some of the sentences you wrote. When you get to these ending points maybe, you're gonna look back at it and you're gonna think about some of the things you're saying. And let's use the example of myself. At one point in time, right, I was really angry about feeling misunderstood, rejected by society. And if I were writing in the first person, writing to myself, I would say something maybe like, I feel rejected by the world. I feel like everyone hates me. I feel like I'm not worthy. In any one of those, you have to take that sentence and know that that's not the end. It's great, cool, you expressed it. I'm so proud of you. But you have to go further now. So once we say something like, I felt rejected because my closest friends did not accept me for who I was. There's a lot of capacity there, because now I can ask why to both of those things. I could take that sentence and go, okay, well, why did I feel like my cousins didn't accept me? Okay, good question, right? Now we have to go, okay, well, we have to almost respond to our other self. It's almost like you are literally playing devil's advocate to yourself at this point, and you are now going to ask why and say, okay, well, they gossip behind, they would whisper about me, and they never ask questions about my life, even though I ask questions about their life. Cool. Now you might have reached an endpoint at some point, but now you can question another aspect of your story. Why does that make you feel unworthy? And now you're starting to get into the hard questions, because now you have to define, well, I felt like no one cared about me. Okay, so is worthiness means that, I guess you're defining that worthiness means that people care about you. Like, well, yeah, And you have to start to go through this process on your own. You can see why at this point it can be so helpful to have a coach, because maybe those questions you didn't think of yourself, or maybe you did. It doesn't matter. It's your own personal choice whether you can decide, or whether you are able to go through this and you're willing to go through the curiosities of your own mind, the curiosities of your own story to figure this out, or you might need the support of a coach. That is up to you to decide. But regardless, there are kind of 3 things that you can use as kind of just a guideline on how to ask yourself these questions. So a lot of times we assume that we have normal reactions. So when we write our story, right? I was with this person and he said this to me, and I can't believe she did that. And I can't believe he did that. And I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I'm this blah, 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 blah. We assume that our reactions are normal. So for example, let's just use like a relationship situation. If people were to break up, we'd say, I feel so rejected by blank person. Let's just say you are on the person being broken up with side of it. I feel so rejected by this situation. Well, yes, it is somewhat normal to feel rejected in a breakup situation, but I think we are overly in tune with accepting that it's normal to feel rejected or betrayed or angry without questioning why that is. Especially those 3, rejected and betrayed and abandoned, or I guess I didn't say abandoned, but rejected, betrayed, and abandoned. We're so used to we're allowed to be angry about those things, and that's totally cool. You're allowed to be angry at any time, by the way. Are you allowed to express it? Different story. But we're used to making that seem normal, but there's some gray space there, because I need you to ask yourself the question of, well, why should someone leaving you make you feel abandoned? Maybe that person decided that you guys were not a good fit. Maybe this is an opportunity for you, and maybe it's a gift. Maybe you have the opportunity to now go meet a person who's better for you. Maybe you have the opportunity, to connect deeper to yourself. Why is it our brains? Well, of course, we have a negativity bias, so we see the negativity, but let's go deeper than that, because there is another memory there. There is another pain there. And a lot of times with our relationship wounds that we have not healed, we have to look at the whole line of relationships that came before that. So now at this point, you should start to be telling your story about everything that came before that is related to that emotion that you're feeling right now. So for example, I went through a really kind of a terrible situation about a year ago where I was kind of in a relationship unintentionally with someone who used to be my friend and kind of emotionally and manipulated me into a situation where I was kind of in a relationship they didn't ever consent to being in. I never accepted, and I never was given the opportunity to accept yes or no. There was a lot of guilt and shame that led me into that situation, and I didn't have the capacity to assert a boundary to be able to get out of it. And so in that situation, when I was telling my story about it and why it was so unfair to me to be in that situation in the first place, I had to ask why I was in that situation in the first place. Why did I feel the way I felt to want to be so fearful of losing that friend in the first place to even be in that situation? Well, you can go further. Sharing what I shared in my previous story about feeling rejected by friends is not hard to see why. It was hard for me to feel rejected by my only friend at the time. I had finally had this one friend, and coming before that, had to deal with a baggage or a pain of feeling like all of my friends had rejected me. Well, going further beyond that, the question is, why do I fear rejection so much? What am I seeking? What am I looking for? What is the emotion that I'm hoping I'm going to experience through that friendship in all senses? Well, why? Oh, well, I want to feel worthy. Well, why don't you feel worthy? Well, I feel like I was good at sports my whole life, but I was always never good enough. And I was really good at school, and I was really never good enough. And so maybe someday, some relationship is going to make me feel like I am worthy in some way. And that's a really abbreviated version because there's going to be a lot of other things that come up. Because that's one example of how a normal reaction that we think is fine and just, oh yeah, that's just how life is. We're supposed to be mad when we have breakups. We're supposed to be mad when people do bad things. Yeah, but also, where did that come from? At the underlying root of this, you have to understand that all of your pain in life is coming from a fear of loneliness. I know that's a bold statement, but if you watch I have a video in the live streams, it's a replay on the signs you don't love yourself. And so attachment, we are all seeking a sense of significance in the world. We need to feel like we are something, someone, in some time, in some place. And we gain that most often through our relationships with people. And those relationships could be our relationships with our parents, our relationships then with partners that we're hoping are going to give us the love our parents never gave us and then we're going to get it from our friends, and then we're going to get it from our boss even. And all of these places are a place for us to feel like we are significant and that we matter. But you're not going to be able to heal this and move on until you are more comfortable with the fact that even if you are a nobody and nothing and no place and no time, that you are still valuable and worthy and good enough. And that is the place you get to when you do this work. I know that's a big concept, okay? I'm not gonna tell you to like go live off in the woods and be by yourself and rely on yourself only. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying we have to get more aware of the fact that most of our actions are driven by a need for significance and attachment. And so as you're doing this questioning side of it, you've written your victim story, you're questioning it, maybe with that idea in mind, you can look at it and go, is it possible that I was motivated to do this by a sense of wanting attachment or significance? That's somewhat of a side note, but it's a really important note that I want you to know going into this because it's going to help a lot in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so this is the second and third thing I want you guys to consider. So that was the first thing to consider. Did you assume that it was a normal reaction to react a certain way? I felt rejected. I felt angry. Okay, go deeper. Ask why, okay? And as you ask why, maybe another memory comes to mind. Okay, now, second thing to consider. Are you angry and do you feel shame or guilt or anger because of something that you have been told is right and wrong, good or bad? This is a really key one if, as you're telling your story, you are arriving at a place where you cannot forgive yourself. And in any story, I think that there is some element of everyone, even if you are still trying to forgive someone else, there's always a part of us that still that needs to forgive ourselves too. And so when you're in that story writing phase, I need you to look at it and think about, is there a belief in there that I have considered to be true? And so let's use an objective example. A lot of people think like of what is right and wrong is dependent on what they were taught to be as kids. And a lot of this is like root chakra, sacral chakra, and solar plexus beliefs. So root chakra would be like, I'm supposed to make a certain amount of money and have a certain type of job and be in a certain type of job in a certain type of industry, and that is good, cool. Sacral chakra, there's a lot of wounds there as well. A lot of times we're ingrained with a set of ideals on what is essentially like a proper social and sexual etiquette of what is right and wrong. Some people don't have that. Some people might have more in the root chakra. It doesn't mean you have all of these, but these are some possibilities. People with the solar plexus belief system might have a set of ideals of what is right and wrong when it comes to how productive you're supposed to be in a day, or whether you're allowed to fail, or whether whether you're allowed to fail is a pretty big one, and the degree of wrongness that comes with failing and messing up. And so those three are some really big ones that can influence that story that you're telling yourself and why you can't forgive, because you have, like I shared, your programming is saying this is the truth, not a subjective truth. Now, it's not to say that you should throw all of your ideals that your parents taught you out the window. It's not at all, because ideals exist and morals exist for a reason. Some of them, they lead us to better things, and that's why our parents work hard to teach them to us. But some of them don't serve us, and some of them might be extreme in some cases. And so if you have guilt or shame in your story, feeling, I feel guilty, I feel ashamed, I feel unworthy, consider if it is because of something that you have been taught that isn't the truth about what is right and wrong for you to do. What is it wrong for you to fail at any point in your life? You should never make mistakes, and you were maybe criticized for making mistakes as a kid. If you had, if you had an experience of being, if you had a sexual relationship with someone and you felt ashamed of that because of the way you grew up, that it might have been a good moral for you to have, but at this point in telling your story, can you at least recognize that it was a belief that is causing you the suffering? It's not the experience, and maybe there is also things to do with that experience, but we're just getting into the nitty-gritty details here of maybe it is this subjective belief. If you have this feeling of like, I'm never supposed to be poor, or I'm never supposed to be in a certain job, I'm capable of more, I should be making six figures, and that sort of thing related to our safety and security and money, then maybe you have a root chakra belief of your parents telling you, that you have to have a certain kind of job, and you cannot be, let's say we live in an RV. There's certainly on the grandparents' level some degree of judgment toward my parents about us deciding to live in an RV and travel the world full time. Like, you have to provide for your kids more. So these are all examples of different things to consider when you're looking at your story. And the third and final thing is I need you to look at your story and go deeper into your motives. And this might be the most important part of these things to question. Because you can look at your story, and if it comes to mind, if you look at those and go, if I tell you to ask why to your story, something might come to mind. But if it doesn't, I need you to think about what motivated you into that situation in the first place. This is how you work backwards into all the memories and other experiences that caused you to be in that situation in the first place. And so you have to understand your motives of how your programming has stacked. Okay, because you've arrived here at this moment in time, not just because you were, as a kid, maybe like scared of people, or you felt like you were judged for who you were, or you're misunderstood, or you weren't lovable. It's not just because of that childhood wound. There was this flip-flop experience throughout your whole life where maybe you overcompensated, maybe in your teen years, maybe not your teen years, maybe it was your 20s. And then you flip-flopped back and you created this new defense mechanism in your mid-20s, and then another defense mechanism or experience or relationship came along where in your 30s, and now you've developed this stack of reactions to this core wound. And I'm basically trying to urge you to go through all of those core experiences that have defined you between the core wound and now. And if you can't think of the core wound, start by going down the chain of events and take this most recent experience and think about what it could have been caused by, what other major experience in your life may have caused you to be motivated into this experience. So that's the gist of the first 3 steps of you letting that shit go. This is all about how to get clear on your story. So tell your story and then move on to part 2 on how to let all this baggage go.